This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
So how much do we really know about the current state of the Michigan football program? Opinions vary, but what about the facts? We're going to give you a little true-false test next on Michigan Podcast.
But there's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deep for Anthony Clark. Waits for it. Hit. Caught.
This is no time for that. In the pocket and a sack. Tim Jamison. Brady gets terrific.
Throws it. Get it. Touchdown. Knight again.
Schultz just before Brazil got him. And a leaping interception by Woodson.
Harbaugh back to throw over the middle. Caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet. Touchdown, Michigan. On its way. It's good.
He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris packs a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Sack. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
Win it. We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again. Michigan.
Go Blue, I'm Steve Deace, and welcome to this week's edition of Michigan Podcast. Still to come, we'll talk plenty of basketball with our good friend Michael Spath from WTKA and Wolverine Digest. But let's begin by talking some Michigan football, shall we? The Wolverines just a couple of weeks away from the start of spring practice. Recruiting is done. The spring game has been announced. Yes, they will actually have one this year on April 13th. Michigan is even going to do a fan fest in addition to the spring game the weekend prior on April 6th. Be Still My Beating Heart, a fan-friendly program. Next thing you know, Jim Harbaugh will do radio interviews, right? Now, let's not get crazy out there, huh? So, there's a lot of talk. And a lot of it's clickbaity, hot takey. And no, every time you and I disagree with something, it's not a hot take. Every time there's an opinion we don't agree with, it's not clickbait. Sometimes we just disagree. Ours is a program because we have the largest living alumni body, the biggest fan base in all of college sports, that a lot of people, when, that bait ain't going to click itself, they like to pick on us. So what about actual, facts and stuff as we head into what I really think is a crap or get off the pot year in year 5 under Jim Harbaugh? What is the current state of the Michigan football program? So here's how we're going to assess this. I have prepared a true or false test for you in the audience. I'm going to throw out a statement. I'll give you a second to think about it, and you can answer true or false. All of these pertain to the current trajectory plus the previous accomplishments of the Michigan football program under Coach Jim Harbaugh heading into year 5. Are you ready? Let's begin. Question or statement, I should say, number 1. Michigan has the 7th best record in college football the past 4 years under Jim Harbaugh. True or false? Michigan has the 7th best record in all of college football the past 4 years under Jim Harbaugh. That's true. It is true that Michigan's record is the 7th best out of 130 Division I teams in all of college football under Jim Harbaugh, which brings us to number 2. The only teams with a better record than Michigan the past 4 years have all made the playoffs. Let me repeat, true or false? The only teams with better records than Michigan the past 4 years all have made the college football playoff. Is that true or is that false? It's false. Wisconsin and Stanford have better records than Michigan the last 4 years, and neither one of them have made the college football playoff. Number 3, Jim Harbaugh is the only Michigan coach ever to lose his first 4 games against Ohio State. True or false? Jim Harbaugh is the only Michigan coach ever to lose his first 4 games against Ohio State. That is sadly true. No other Michigan coach has lost his first 4 games to the Scarlet and Gray Menace. Number 4, Jim Harbaugh is the only Michigan coach to have 3 double-digit win seasons in his first 4 years. Jim Harbaugh is the only Michigan coach to have 3 double-digit wins seasons in his first 4 years. Is that true or is that false? And that one is true. Now, of course, some of it is the 12-game regular season, which we didn't have. I mean, Schembechler took over when it was still a 10-game regular season. It went to 11 in 1971. We didn't have a 12-game regular season under Gary Moeller. That actually didn't come in until about halfway through the Lloyd Carr era. But he is still the only Michigan coach that can make this claim. 3 double-digit win seasons in his first 4 years. Number 5. Jim Harbaugh is the first Michigan coach to fail to win a conference title in his first 4 seasons. Jim Harbaugh, is he really, true or false, the first Michigan coach? Now, Michigan has the all-time lead in the Big Ten in conference titles. Is he the first Michigan coach not to win one in his first 4 years at the helm? And that one is false. In fact, the great Fritz Chrysler, he of the basketball arena being named after him, Fritz Chrysler didn't win his first Big Ten title until his 6th season in Ann Arbor, and it was actually his only conference title, if you can believe that. Number 6, Jim Harbaugh's average margin of defeat of 16.5 points per loss is the worst ever by a Michigan coach against Ohio State. Jim Harbaugh's average margin of defeat of 16.5 points per loss is the worst ever by a Michigan coach against Ohio State. Is that true or is that false? It's false. It's the second worst, next to Rich Rodriguez. Not sure that's the company you want to keep around here. Number 7, Michigan has spent more weeks ranked in the AP Top 10 under Jim Harbaugh than it did the total decade before he arrived. Think of that. That can't be true. That's ridiculous, right? That in the 4 years under Harbaugh, Michigan's been in the AP Top 10 more often than it was the 10 years before he got here. That can't be true. And if you know from any experience taking a true-false test, when it looks like it can't be true, it is. That is true. In fact, Michigan under Harbaugh has been ranked in the AP Top 10 a total of 29 weeks in his first 4 seasons. The 10 years prior, from 2004 to 14, they were ranked in the AP Top 10 a total of 21 weeks. It's not even close, actually. 29 to 21. Number 8, 3 more. Jim Harbaugh has already won more Big Ten games than Rich Rodriguez and Brady Hoke won combined. Put it another way, Jim Harbaugh, true or false, has already won more Big Ten games than his 2 predecessors won combined. Is that true or false? It's true. Rich Rod and Hoke combined for 24 conference wins during their time in Ann Arbor. That's a total of 6 seasons. Harbaugh already has 26 in 4 seasons. Of course, the league now plays a 9-game conference schedule, but he's coached 2 fewer seasons as well. So, plus it's a better league now than it was when those guys were coaching in it as well. So keep that in mind. Number 9, Jim Harbaugh is the first Michigan coach to fail to win a major bowl game in his first 4 seasons. Is Jim Harbaugh the first Michigan coach to fail to win a major bowl game? Rose, sugar, cotton, orange, fiesta. Is he the first one to fail to win one of those in his first 4 seasons? False. Bo Schembechler did not win a major bowl game until his 12th season. Both Gary Moeller and Lloyd Carr won a Rose Bowl in their 3rd seasons, however. And then finally, number 10. Jim Harbaugh is the first Michigan coach to win his first 2 in-state rivalry games at Spartan Stadium. True or false? Jim Harbaugh is the first Michigan coach to win his first 2 rivalry games at Spartan Stadium, and that one is true. Now, for the first half century of this rivalry, Michigan wouldn't play in Spartan Stadium, even when it played Michigan State at all. But yes, he's the only Michigan coach ever to start 2-0 in games at Spartan Stadium. So what does all this mean? What it all means is that guy, next to me in the picture there on the screen, Coach Harbaugh, deserves an immense amount of gratitude and credit for what he has done to rebuild this program to get it back to a place of national relevance and competitiveness. That is clear. However, what's also clear is some of the expectations, the loftier ones especially, that we had and hoped for when he took over have not been met. And if you're not going to do it this year with no Urban Meyer and a senior quarterback, 5 stars, and all those weapons back on offense and all your, well, not all, but pretty much all of your toughest games, Iowa, Notre Dame, Ohio State, Michigan State, at home, then you kind of wonder if you're ever going to take that next step. That's why this is the crap or get off the pot year for Jim Harbaugh. Thank you to all of you that are supporting us here on Patreon. We get asked frequently, hey, what can we do to support what you guys are doing here at Michigan Podcast? And one of the best ways to do that is to support us with a very inexpensive nominal contribution at Patreon. And as you can see, throughout the course of the year for our Patreon supporters, we do give you exclusive content we don't offer anywhere else, just as a way of saying thank you. So to all of you that have supported us throughout the year at Patreon, thank you. Thank you in advance to those of you who are willing to sign up and do so in the future, and go blue. And we are joined now here on Michigan Podcast by our good friend Michael Spath from WTKA in Ann Arbor and Wolverine Digest. Michael, good to have you with us here today. Welcome aboard. Go blue. How are you?
I'm doing real well, guys. Thanks for having me, as always.
So I've got a crazy theory I want to run by you about this season's basketball team. And it's something it's something I haven't heard anywhere else, which probably means it's dumb. All right. And I know you well enough to know if it is, you'll say, Steve, that's really dumb. Okay. But,
all right, I'm on the edge of my seat here.
This has kind of been unlike any team of Beeline's we've seen. And I don't know if any next level offensive breakthrough is on its way. You kind of are what you are. Now, I think we will have some games, where we're going to put up, 10, 11, 12, 13 threes because the shots are falling. Okay. But, I don't know that with the makeup of this year's team and the way that it is, I don't know we're ever going to be a team with a lot of ball movement and motion on offense consistently. I mean, we haven't seen it up until this point. I'm wondering something. And we went through this entire month of December where we had this, really soft schedule other than the Big Ten ACC Challenge. And we didn't take any opportunity to develop a bench at all whatsoever. And I go back to last season when Mo Wagner turned his ankle against Texas and he was going to be out the next few weeks. And that was the perfect opportunity for John Teske to get a lot of quality minutes, if you'll recall, because they had to play him, and that paid dividends later on. So here's my theory that when a head coach is hands-on as John Beilein, who's been through this is the 3rd iteration of an assistant coaching staff he's had in the 12 years he's been here at least. Okay. So when you are as hands-on with everything as John Beilein has, and you essentially miss an entire offseason because of double bypass heart surgery, you don't go on the foreign trip, you're not there all season long. If you look at the way this season got started, where they started better than any Michigan team since the 2012-2013 team, and started better than any Michigan team ever. And they don't seem to be kicking it into another gear down the stretch. Are we seeing the fruit of Coach B not being there during the offseason to take extra time into trusting and developing some of these younger guys? One of the reasons we started so well at the beginning of the year is we did play so many of our known players who were used to playing together so many minutes when teams like Villanova and are breaking in so many new guys, and North Carolina's figuring out what to do with a freshman point guard, and Nassar Little and all those guys. And now we're kind of at that point of the year where younger teams are beginning to improve and get better. And maybe we've reached our ceiling because the offseason time that was lost this past offseason in getting these young guys ready for this time of year to take the next step. Do you think there's any merit to that theory?
I think that's really dumb, Steve. I actually think that there's something there. And I would caution this is while some of Michigan's competitors or some of the teams that they could face in the NCAA tournament have the ability to be getting better right now, and you know they're maximizing their ceiling at the most important time of the year. I still think that the team that showed up in November and in December, if that team can show up in March and in April, even if it is a 6-man rotation, I think that team can make a Final Four. Mm-hmm. The problem is as you said, and I never really thought about that before, but the fact that he didn't spend the summer with David DeJulius, the fact that he didn't spend the summer with Brandon Johns, the fact that he didn't spend the summer with Colin Castleton or even someone that's a returning player, Eli Brooks, and really work on these guys and develop these guys and learn to trust these guys. I think there's a lot to be said about the fact that here we are late in the season, and the only guys that he really feels completely comfortable with are the guys that he already knows with the addition of Iggy Brasdakis. Mm-hmm. And
if you look at Iggy and compare him physically to all the other guys you just mentioned, he's at a different maturity level than those guys, obviously.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's how much is it going to cost them? I mean, we've been asking ourselves two questions for essentially a couple of months now, and we've been kind of doing it a little bit, subtly. I mean, you and I probably had a little more frank discussions about it, but I think a lot of fans have been saying to themselves, does this lack of a bench and does this lack of outside shooting, to what degree will this cost Michigan basketball? And to me, it reminds me of when you're in mid-October and you're beating Wisconsin and Michigan State and Penn State, mm-hmm. and you're saying, okay, there's two things about this Michigan football team. They're winning a lot of games, we're having a lot of fun as fans. It's a great ride. There's two things. One is this inability to really take over a game with the passing attack. And the second one is this inability to defend the middle of the field as a defense. And so you're kind of saying yourself, will this ever come back to haunt us? And unfortunately in football it did. And in basketball, it has a couple of times against Iowa and against Michigan State. I look at the Penn State game as a little bit of an anomaly with John Beilein getting tossed at the first half. Yeah. And Penn State certainly
that's the outlier game every top team in the country other than Duke has had this year. Yeah.
Right. So, but I look at the Michigan State game, look at the Iowa game, you look at the games coming up, Maryland next weekend, Michigan State in a couple of weeks, the postseason, and that's what you're asking yourself is, will Michigan's phenomenal smothering defense that, with the exception of this Michigan State game and really maybe one or two players has been on target, and its intangibles, its leadership, the ability to have 5 or 6 different guys lead this team, will that be what ultimately matters, or what ultimately matters the lack of the bench and the lack of the outside shooting? And I think if you're depending on if you're glass half full or glass half empty, I like to think of myself as a glass half full when it comes to covering Michigan sports. I tend to be more of a glass half empty. And I think there's I don't want to say a panic in me or in the fan base, but I think there's a little bit of a concern that will ultimately cost this team and boot them in that Sweet 16 game or earlier than that is going to be that lack of bench and lack of outside shooting.
Yeah, I think some people watching or listening right now might say, what's the big deal? You missed the offseason. Coaches can't interact with them anyway. That's why they do Camp Sanderson. Mm-hmm. I think folks need to understand the rules in basketball with coach contact in the offseason are different than football. In football, it's pretty strict. I mean, once you say goodbye to them at the end of the school year, you can't monitor directly and a lot of that kind of stuff. That's where the strength and conditioning coach really is the head coach from, in May, June, and July. In basketball, you are allowed direct contact and coaching time during the offseason with your players. Not to mention this year, they took that foreign trip as well. So those would have been opportunities for Coach Beilein to be there. And he watched all the film, but it's not the same where he was there. He could have been there to move David DeJulius and some of these guys a few steps ahead once you get him out there against live ammo and see where some of the weaknesses that come to the forefront are. And he wasn't there for that. And you can't tell me a guy that some people think is the best active coach in the sport right now, not being active an entire offseason. Maybe we should have thought about this before, that there might be, and maybe we didn't see that because they got to such a great start. And we kind of thought that's where you'd probably see it, would be that point in time. But maybe now when a Charles Matthews turns his ankle, and you're sitting there thinking, boy, look what this does to our ability to stop Michigan State from getting to the rim, losing one guy on defense because you don't have someone else that can do what he can do at his size. Maybe now that we're playing these top 40 defensive teams every night, the lack of depth is where you're really seeing what progress we didn't make this offseason is maybe coming to fruition. Just a thought that I had, that's all.
Yeah, I think when you look at it, I mean, every year you're putting together a roster and you're saying, okay, I want to have, two guys at every position that I can count on. And this is really the first time. I know John Beilein's always had a shorter bench, but this is really the first time that I can think of, since early on in the Trey Burke era, where Michigan has not been able to go too deep at more than three positions. And really when they go too deep at the center position and they go too deep at the 4 and 5 with the same guy in Isaiah Livers, because they don't really have that much confidence in Brandon Johns. They don't really have that much confidence in Colin Castleton. And I can't also remember being this late in the year and having such a lack of development from those bench players. And again, Isaiah Livers the exception, but everybody else, Eli Brooks and Brandon Johns and Castleton and DeJulius, I mean, if Michigan were to lose somebody, were to lose Xavier Simpson, were to lose Jordan Poole for an extended period of time, yeah, maybe those guys were able to step up and they would surprise us. But right now, there's no feeling that those guys could do that. There's no feeling that those guys can give you quality minutes because we haven't seen it. And again, I think to me, Steve, is, and I wonder what your thoughts is. There is such a similarity between this Michigan basketball team and the football team back in the fall, and it's a team that relied on having a terrific defense to carry it, game after game. And then what happens when that defense fails? What happens when that defense struggles? And in the first half against Michigan State, they struggled. They didn't really struggle the rest of the game, but for a first half, they struggled. They struggled on the road at Iowa. They struggled against Penn State. And in those situations, did they have another weapon? Did they have the offense that could be explosive and ball out? And they didn't. And that's the same thing in football. When it came push to shove and the defense was solved a little bit, could the offense handle its business? And it couldn't. And so I'm kind of looking at these two seasons, and I'm wondering if we're being set up for a little bit of a similar type of result where it comes, a little bit crashing down. It's still been a great year, but in terms of maybe what our expectations were, how they got inflated throughout the season because of being 17-0, 9-1 in the Big Ten. And if we started to dream big, maybe we're going to come back to reality here. I hope I'm wrong. John Beilein has certainly proven me wrong and proven all of us wrong multiple times, but I'm just not feeling it this year.
Well, if you're making football season analogies, then let me go one further. I'm wondering if Tom Izzo and Michigan State found a chink in the defensive armor with the adjustment that they made on Sunday. And one of the major adjustments they made is they essentially just ran an all ball screen offense. I mean, they didn't even really try anything other than ball screens for Cassius Winston up and down, all over the floor to get Michigan out of position. But the other adjustment they made when Michigan was on, is that they had Cassius Winston holding the ball more often than we've typically seen. And so when we do those, when Teske or or Iggy or whoever is the other guy there that does the hedge, but it was often Teskey. Now he is outside of his comfort zone, 25 feet from the basket. So he's not just doing a hedge and he's flashing there, all right, to stop a guy from getting his puppy set to launch a three. He's now out there for a good full second, maybe a full 2 seconds. And now either Winston is finding a guy wide open under the hoop, or with one pass and then a ball reversal, that second pass is finding that guy, because now our rim protector's out of position and the rest of the defense can't rotate fast enough. I wonder if that is something we're going to see the rest of our opponents attempt to do from this time forward, because it's really the only chink in Michigan's defensive armor that's been shown all season long by anybody.
Yeah, I mean, I do think we're going to see it over and over again. What it comes down to, though, is you have to have a really special point guard, because you have to have someone that's comfortable being pushed further and further away from the basket like John Teskey does.
Right.
And then will he make the right decision? I mean, if you go back and watch, 40 minutes of Cassius Winston playing, how many times did he make the wrong decision with the ball? Maybe once or twice in the entire game. I mean, his ability to find the open man underneath the basket was so critically important in that first half of that game. And that was much more so than him scoring. I go back and watch the game. I mean, he didn't hit an outside shot. He didn't hit a three-pointer. He got to the lane a couple of times, but he wasn't quite the scorer that we've seen him be. But what he was a great distributor and a guy that just kept the ball moving and kept the ball moving to the right places. I think what you see a lot of times is you see that point guard panic a little bit when the hedge takes place on a ball screen, and they immediately give the ball up. And as soon as they give the ball up, then Teskey has the ability to leave and go back and find his guy before the wing can get that ball into and get into the post. And so we didn't see that against Michigan State. Cassius Winston and Tom Izzo bet on the fact that it is far better for him, as you said, to hold on to it and for him to make that decision than to pass it off to Matt McQuaid or pass it off to Aaron Henry immediately, and those guys then decide to feed the post or go back to Cassius Winston. That was brilliant coaching. Essentially, again, it's akin to football, right?
Yeah.
Is Tom Izzo looked at all of Michigan's weaknesses and said, okay, I'm going to take a chance and go right at every single one of them. And if I'm proven wrong, then I'm gonna get burned here.
Yeah, I'm wondering, are these Mike DeBoard's crossing routes in the Indiana game? You know what I'm saying here?
Yeah. They absolutely are. And it's the Ohio State game where you're like, hey, we're going to sell out to stop the running game because we don't think you're going to throw the ball on us.
Well, that's the next point I was going to make, was the way they play defense. I thought was fascinating. They essentially admitted your guys with the bounce are better than our guys on defense. We cannot stop you from getting to the rim. We cannot defend Iggy. We can't stop Jordan Poole. We can't stop Charles Matthews from getting in the lane. We can't stop Xavier Simpson on that sky hook. So we can't stop. We have nobody to put a body on Teskey when he rolls to the rim and you throw the lob to him. So here's what we're going to do. We're just going to gamble that today is not one of the days that you guys make 10, 11, 12, 13 threes. If it is, we'll throw our hands up to you. God bless you. You're better. Yep. See you next time. But we're going to gamble today's not one of those days. And that's the way they played. Very reminiscent of the way Ohio State played defense, which was we're sending our linebackers downhill through the gap on every down. And if you want to beat us 25 yards throwing the ball down the field, we're going to dare you that you're too stubborn and just won't do it. And it worked, right? And that's what Michigan State did to us defensively on Sunday. Yeah, 100%. I mean, I completely agree with that. I mean, look at the way that they sagged off of Xavier Simpson. And Tom Izzo, I mean, a lot of teams have done this, but he essentially said, like, go ahead, take the three, Xavier. Like, if you end up hitting that one game against Northwestern when you hit 5 3-pointers, if you hit 5 3-pointers in this game, then, my hat's off to you, and I'll shake your hand afterwards and say you beat us, but I'm not going to let you get to the basket on us. And on Jordan Poole, I mean, I think they banked on the fact that Jordan Poole does what Jordan Poole wants to do, and he takes ridiculous shots from 3-point land, and he will drive the hoop regardless of whether or not the lane is there, and he loves to take shots. And I think they were like, we're just going to let him take those shots. And if he has a game like he did against Minnesota where he hit 5 or 6 3-pointers in that game and scored 20-something points? Yeah.
Well, then again, similar to Xavier Simpson, then we got beat. But we're going to essentially say we've seen enough film to believe that you got that on 3 out of every 5 games, you're not going to be able to hit those shots. You're not going to be able to make smart decisions. And so we're going to bank that this is one of those three games, and that's what they did, and it proved. Now, the funny thing is, Steve, is that if they go with the same game plan, and if I was Tom Izzo, I would, against Michigan in a couple of weeks, it could be the exact opposite. Jordan Poole could hit those shots.
That's
David
exactly
Simmons
right.
could hit those shots.
Yeah.
Charles Matthews could, being a little healthier, could get to the rim. They could hit those shots, and it could be a different outcome. But if you're Michigan State and you do the same game plan, and if you're Maryland, you do the same game plan. And if you're Nebraska, you try to do the same game plan. And when Michigan gets into a tournament, as you said, every team that they play is going to go back to this Michigan State game and go, okay, what did Tom Izzo do against John Beilein in Michigan?
Well, and we've seen Michigan State do something similar like this, particularly when we played them at Breslin a few years ago. They basically, that team that won the Big Ten title in 2014, they went in there and basically said to a freshman named Derek Walton, you beat us. We're not letting Nick Stauskas beat us. We're not letting Glenn Robinson III beat us. You're going to beat us. And he had a great game, and he did. And then they said last year to Xavier Simpson, you beat us at the free throw line. You close us out. We don't think you can do that. And he did. All right. So we've seen, I would suspect we will see Izzo do the exact same thing. And then you're right. If it's one of those games that Michigan makes 10 plus threes, I bet you with the way they play defense, they come out of there with a win. And if they don't, they'll probably lose by 7 to 12 points. Something like that would be my guess. It'll be just like that. Yeah. Now before we close this out, Michael, let's keep everything in perspective. Okay. We are sitting here going into the last week and a half of the season with a team that's got just one fewer loss or more wins than Duke and less losses than North Carolina. Okay. So let's keep in perspective. This has been one hell of a season, but we're getting now down to nut cutting time here. And what you and I are discussing, these are the differences between finishing third or fourth in the Big Ten or winning it. This is the difference between being a Sweet 16 team or playing the last weekend of the season. We're into these slim margin for errors now. That's really what we're talking about. So we are making these pointed observations and in recognition of the fact this has still been a hell of a season for this basketball team. We need to note that as well.
Well, absolutely, and I love that we have this conversation. I love that we're nitpicking and looking at the flaws and looking at the strengths of the team and saying, which one's going to show up, because our expectations and our ceiling and our goals and dreams for this Michigan basketball team now have been raised thanks to John Beilein. I mean, if 5 or 6 years ago, if you would have said they got in the Sweet 16, we would have all said 100% this is a A+ season. And if they get the Sweet 16 this year and they finish second or third in the Big Ten and they finish second in the Big Ten tournament, we're all going to look and go like, this is a very good year for Michigan. But he has reestablished what the bar is and what it means. And so if you want to be a team that plays in the final weekend, then these are the things that you have to look internally at and say, okay, we have to fix this. And I guarantee you John Beilein's doing that because he'd like to go all the way as far as he can with this team. So it's a fun conversation to have. And those guys are having it, and the media's having it, and the fans should be having it too. That doesn't mean that you can't sit back and say, I've had so much fun watching this team, and I'm really enjoying it, and I just want to see how far they go, and I'm going to have a great adventure and get together with my buddies and have a beer and just celebrate what this season has been already. But if what this program has become is a national championship contender and a Big Ten championship contender, then if you want those two things, you've got to shore up the areas that we're talking about. And that is incredibly exciting that we are talking about Big Ten titles and Final Four berths and what this season still could have for the Wolverines if they can adapt a little bit. But I mean, season's running out, like the breaking the habits of Jordan Poole. We talked about this on my show on Monday. I mean, here you are 5 months into the season and almost a full year after he hit that shot against Houston. And I mean, they're still trying to break his habits. It's not going to happen overnight. There are some things that this Michigan basketball team can do better besides outside shooting, because that's not going to be their strength. That's not changing, that they can improve and give themselves the best chance to be successful here in the Big Ten and nationally.
Well said. And you know what? this isn't much different than last year. Go look at the NCAA tournament last year. They sucked offensively against Montana. They were not good offensively against Houston. And if it wasn't for maybe the greatest individual shot in Michigan basketball history, the season ends there. They shot the lights out against Texas A&M. All right. They couldn't buy one against Florida State until the end of the game when they made a couple of clutch ones. They shot like crap against Loyola of Chicago. They got shot out of the gym against Villanova. I mean, this isn't much different than last year's team when you stop and look at it, Michael.
No, I mean, you're absolutely correct. And so they just got to get, I don't even think they got to get hot at the right time, because I don't know about hot. They just got to play their best basketball. What is their strengths, which is their defense and the ability for 5 or 6 different guys to get to double figures. They've just got to play that type of basketball when against Michigan State, against Maryland, in the Big Ten tournament, in the NCAA tournament, and then we could be talking about another really special run for them. And if it ends in the Sweet 16, Steve, I think you and I will both say, like, hey, you know, we feel like it maybe ended a little bit too soon, but we'll acknowledge what a great year it has been and what a fun ride it has been.
Michael Spath, WTKA-Ann Ann Arbor. Check him out there, and we always appreciate you joining us here, Michael. Good to see you. Go Blue.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Take care. If you like what we do here, WolverineDigest.com is the website. We update it frequently with commentary. If you don't want to wait until Tuesday and when a new episode gets unveiled each week, keep updated each and every week at WolverineDigest.com. Both myself and Michael Spath from WTKA-Ann Ann Arbor write commentary there each and every day. WolverineDigest.com. This week's Twitter poll results, given Michigan basketball's schedule down the stretch, which do you think is more likely? 1, they will run the table and win a share of the Big Ten title, which would require Purdue to lose a game too. Or 2, lose the double bye in the Big Ten tournament. 68% of you said to lose the double bye. Now, before you say, oh, that's a ridiculous hot take, go back to 2013. That was the year Michigan previously set the record for its best start ever, which this team broke. They were ranked number 1 during parts of that season. They were ranked number 2 during parts of this season as well. The Wolverines came down to the last weekend of the regular season with a chance at the Big Ten title, hosting Indiana. Jordan Morgan had a tip-in at the rim. It literally touched every part of the rim except the part it needed to go through the net. And when that tip-in did not fall, we would have had a 4-way tie for first place in the Big Ten at 13-5 that year. Indiana ended up winning it all by itself. Michigan fell from tying for the Big Ten title to the 6th seed in the Big Ten tournament on that one missed tip-in alone. Okay, so before you think it's ridiculous, it's not. Now, looking and playing around with the tiebreakers and the future schedules, it looks like what needs to happen is Michigan needs to beat Nebraska this week. And then Wisconsin needs to lose one more game. If those two things happen, regardless of what happens in those final 2 road games against Maryland and Michigan State, Maryland now is in the top 15 in Ken Palm. Michigan State's in the top 5. So if regardless of either of those games, if Michigan beats Nebraska and Wisconsin loses at least one game, it looks like Michigan is locked into the double bye, meaning a top 4 finish in the Big Ten. But go back to that 2013 season. That is not as ridiculous, given how bunched up and how deep this league is. And it's probably the deepest this year it's been, at least since that year. It's not ridiculous that we could end up being out of the top 4 in the conference and ranked in the top 10 in all of the polls. That's what the conference has been this year. It's so deep. This week's question of the week from Joel, going back to last weekend's reunion, 30th year reunion with the 1989 national championship team. He wants to know, did I have a problem with bringing back Steve Fisher, given how his tenure ended? Now, for those of you that are younger, you may not recall that really a lot of people think the first Fab Five, those guys were all on the take. It was really just Chris Webber. And then it was kind of the second Fab Five, Lewis Bullock, Robert Tractor Trailer. That's where he had the SUV turnover on a wintry road when Mateen Cleaves was on his official visit. And let's just say this thing was pretty tricked out for a college kid. They tried to say that his mom owned it. Right. It was really the second Fab Five, the Gerard Ward, Maurice Taylor, Maceo Baston, Lewis Bullock group. It was more that group that Ed Martin was more directly tied into with that scandal at the time. That was the Michigan booster who was paying players. And then Chris Webber's role in that process when he was crying, how poor he was, and then he was making essentially a nice upper middle class income from Ed Martin at the time. That came out because Ed Martin got involved in some criminal problems, and Chris Webber got subpoenaed. And you can lie to the NCAA because they don't have any subpoena power and they can't get you for perjury, but the feds can. And so it was really in that grand jury testimony, as I recall, that the truth came out about what Ed Martin had paid Chris Webber. But a lot of that stuff with Martin was more tied to the second Fab Five than the first. So regardless of whether you think Steve Fisher was directly involved, whether he maybe kind of, hear no evil, see no evil, looked the other way to give tacit approval because it was helping him, land Maceo Baston. I don't have a clue if Maceo Baston was involved in that, but at that time, that Fab Five was Maceo Baston from Texas, Gerard Ward from Mississippi. I think Lewis Bullock was from the Washington, D.C. area. Regardless of what you think of Fisher and how that era ended, it's been 20 years now since he was fired here. And I think 20 years is enough time for a penalty, punishment, banishment. I think the point was made. And I think when it's been this long and and maybe even before this moment, frankly, I don't know, 5-10 years, maybe you could have done this. But at the very least, I think we all can agree 20 years is enough of an exile that you now should feel like mercy triumphs over judgment. And it's okay to look back fondly on a team that brought a lot of joy to my life at a time when I had a pretty troubled upbringing. And that was that 1989 national championship team, one of the most beloved moments and teams in all of Michigan athletics history. So I think the university did the right thing by bringing him back. 20-year banishment, especially when you've got North Carolina just making up classes, coaches on wiretapes nowadays, just, essentially engaging in money laundering with shoe companies, whatever Steve Fisher and or Ed Martin vis-a-vis together, colluded or not, whatever went down 20 years ago, we paid a 10-year penalty for it. We went without an NCAA tournament from 1998 to 2009. And then Steve Fisher's been banned here for 20 years. There's been enough comeuppance. I think it's time to reunite, heal, and move on. I want to thank our friends at Detroit Sports Podcast for helping to get the word out about what we do here each and every week. Thanks to all of you that watch here on YouTube or listen via podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, etc. Leave us a 5-star review on that podcast. Leave us a like here on YouTube. Subscribe on both. And if you like what we do, share what we do as well with everybody you know. And follow us on Twitter at Michigan Podcast. Until next week, go Blue.